Hello, everyone. Joachim Stroh from Brooklyn, New York, with another session on the social ledger. Today is part two, actually, part two of looking at the intersection of the social ledger and liquid democracy. We started it last time and uncovered some interesting parallels to what we're doing with the social ledger. And today I wanted to show you, a couple of more thoughts on that, especially around the area of how do you avoid any corruption and bad actors in liquid democracy, and how some of these structures or rules that we can put into the social ledger could avoid that. But again, this is the beginning of a longer conversation, so let's just dive right into this. Da-dum. Where's the screen share? Here we go. Oh, by the way, here's this thing John Kelton also posted that this morning in the conversation community. I love that chart. You see that on the screen?
Yeah.
Big trusting, and then you can go left side. Trust no. Okay, well then you won't know what you're getting into there. Or trust yes, right? Do it, and thank you. We're done with it. Right. Hi, Philip.
Hello. Hope you don't mind me just dropping in. Please don't do a recount. I'm late. I know that, so I'll just try and catch up. But
Good,
lovely
good.
to see you all.
Lovely to see you. I just have the right chart for you on the screen here, Philip. We can go the left side with trust, or we can go the right side with trust. I know, it's not that simple, right? But it's something that popped up in John Kelton's conversation community this morning. I thought I wanted to start here. So the topic for today is the intersection of the social ledger and liquid democracy. So I wanted to drill down and have some ideas I wanted to share with you today. See where that takes us. Okay, let's go to the beginning of the use case here. Have you seen the slides before, Philip? They're from the design deck.
Yes. Oh, I've watched a couple of the videos that you kind of recorded after the event. So yes.
Okay, cool.
Thanks.
Well, we can speed through those that we have already seen. So that's the use case for liquid democracy. Anybody who hasn't seen the previous one, I'll post a link to that in the recording. So essentially, we're looking at the centerpiece here, right? So liquid democracy, something between direct democracy, where everybody's voting directly, has something to say directly, versus representative democracy, what we have now in the US, as some constituents here in the center that we delegate our vote to. And they do all the stuff for us, willingly or not, wanting or not, they do it. Anyway, so liquid democracy here in the center is a way where you sort of mix both sides together into, you can either vote directly, like this bee in the center here, right? Or you can delegate your vote, like these two others in the bottom left, to another bee here that represents you and that's voting for you. And then the interesting case here, Jim pointed out that our last time is this bee on the right here that may have delegated it to another bee, but changed her mind, right? And then said, no, I'm not going to let my delegate vote. It's too important for me, that issue. I want to vote directly, right? So instead of sort of undoing the vote if it already happened from the delegate, or just overriding the vote by going directly in and say, okay, this is my vote for this. So this would always take precedence over a delegate here. So that's an interesting special case here in liquid democracy. Another thing here, what I very much like about this is an emergent structure. So you really don't know who the delegates are. They come out of the system because people point to them. And obviously other people will see that certain people have more votes suddenly, and they show up in some kind of a list, and they become more trusted, right, in the network, because they did the right actions, they did the right votes, or they presented the right case, or have the right backup to support their case. So they're more and more trusted. So I could see this as an effect here, that out of this initial state where everybody votes directly, some people, groups even might arise out of this, who fulfill that role here in the center of the delegation. So that kind of structure that can emerge out of this is pretty interesting. Okay, let me move on to the card-based interface, and that again is the intersection now between the social ledger, the next generation social ledger, and liquid democracy. This is just a minor change on this. So this is basically the voting screen here, where you have either issues or, this is just an example here. Let me move this. Can be ballots, can be policies, can be bills, can be proposals, can be tickets, anything that requires some kind of a voting mechanism in this list of things. And these cards have now different states, right? So initial state is it hasn't been created yet, and somebody needs to sort of claim an issue, or create an issue, out of nothing. So there can be something important we need to decide or work on. So you can create this card, and it exists suddenly, and then somebody takes ownership. So ownership, again, is a very important component of the social ledger. What I wanted to do here is it is a mapping, one-to-one mapping between a card that exists, which is tied to some kind of a document, some kind of an artifact stored in some kind of a system, right? And the person who claims that artifact, right? It says, okay, I'm taking ownership of, let's say, issue 774 here. And then that person would show up in that list of avatars on the bottom here. So in that case, maybe Jim would claim ownership here for issue 774. So we always know who is the go-to person, who's the first person who claimed it or created that issue. But he's not alone, right? That's an important piece in the social ledger. There are others that are now also looking at supporting Jim, right? Obviously contributing and doing other work for that. And they would also show up in that list. And that creates sort of the memory around that card, right? So we know who participated over time and who contributed over time to this particular issue, right? So again, the voting mechanism of this thing is pretty simple, right? So in this case, we have 3 buttons here. There's an up vote, a down vote, and a no up vote, right? Just saying, I don't know at this point, or I don't care, but I just want to say that I have recognized, acknowledged there is something in case we have a certain quota to fulfill, a certain percentage of people participating in the vote. So you can click on the no up button.
No opinion.
No opinion, no up. For me, it's a no up, no operation. I did some assembly programming way back, and that's one of the operations they use there, right? But yeah, no opinion. Then if you have voted, you get to this card here where it says you or your delegate voted on this issue here with a timestamp, and then you're done with it. And you can begin the counting process, right? So who has voted and who didn't vote. The new thing on this slide is something called a meta vote. And I have a separate slide for that, actually. So a meta vote goes into thinking about the vote. It's a meta layer. It's like, I draw the comparison here to second order cybernetics. So you have a loop, a feedback loop from what comes out of the issue that you're voting on, and then there's a second order loop that says, why are we voting on an issue like that, right? That to me is a meta vote, and to me this is an important mechanism because it helps to align all of the activities inside a, say, collective or community, right? Because whoever can do the meta vote can say that this issue is critical, it is important. Whatever you guys decide, I don't care if it's yes, no, up, down, move that forward, right? Versus I can see that maybe issue 774 has nothing to do with the direction and the idea of the collective. I don't want this to move ahead. And a meta vote would enable that to sort of either put it on hold or rethink it, right? Or do something else with that issue. So that would be an important second order feedback mechanism, right? And I'll get to that in another slide that I want to bring into this discussion of liquid democracy. Okay, that's one thing that changed on this slide. The other thing here is, and that's an interesting discussion on this new screen. I call that identity screen now. It originally was only about delegation. So this means this would be a screen where I say, okay, I delegate my vote to Anton. Right, say here, the first person here, he is in marketing and in finance, right? So he is a member of these two domains, and I trust him, and I'm delegating my vote to Anton. So just clicking on that button here would delegate it, and anything that comes up in marketing or finance would no longer be, you know, I mean, I could still glance and see what's going on, but he would take over my vote. So he would increase, his voting power would increase by one vote, which I delegated, right? So that's the delegation mechanism, right? But now here's another mechanism that might be interesting for you, Jim, too. I'm thinking to bring the whole membership assignment also into this the same voting mechanism. So let's say Charlie here, right? So Charlie is a new member, and he wants to be in governance and in finance, right? So he tags himself with governance and finance. That's all he does, right? But, you know, there's an interim step. That doesn't mean he's now an owner of that, or not owner, let's say a member of that, of these two domains. There's another step that says we can do a voting mechanism just like we did on issues, right? On persons, on people too. So we can say, that's cool. That's cool. So Charlie, I know Charlie, he's very knowledgeable about governance, and he has a good finance background. So yes, vote him up. Other people say, I don't care. Okay, whatever others vote is fine. Or some might say, no, be careful. And he screwed up something in the past. Maybe, you know, not so good to have him in that domain. But again, I just wanted to keep the mechanism the same now, to say, hey, we can apply that to issues and to people, right? So once we do this and he's good to go, then he would be approved, say, yes, he can be a delegate, or he can vote, or even create new items in governance and in finance, right? So it's like a, you know, a similar mechanism, using it both for delegation and for the membership. And now here where it gets interesting is, once we do that, a structure actually consists only of these tags that we create, right? So we can say there's a control list of there's a kind of a controlled, I don't want to call it folksonomy, because that will say too much about everybody can create their own tags, but it's at least open enough so anyone can create new tags in the system that relate to the structure of it, right? So when we say here there's marketing and finance and there's technology, so these are certain domains that we're creating here. We all agree on these domains. We all agree on, yes, there are certain activities happening within these domains, right? And if I say the membership is also not tied to that, so I can say when I join this here, okay, I'm at least interested in the governance aspect of the collective, and I'm interested in the finance aspect of the collective, right? So put my name in there, right? Put my name in the box, and that's what this would provide. And I don't even want to go any further than that to say, am I, you know, affiliated with any activities, you know, of what's happening in that domain. This could be the full interface for that, for the delegation and for the membership. So I'll stop here for a moment if you have any thoughts on that.
You would say that, you know, this is awesome, and something that we're starting to play with in the bounty system, in associating people with labels, and currently using the trust metric for power, but moving toward liquid democracy. And
Awesome.
Assignment.
Okay.
My only question, Joachim, you may have addressed whilst I ran out the room to quiet my dog who was barking her head off. So apologies if I missed it due to that domestic incident. It's to do with the tags, because you know in Mattermost I asked a question about this because I couldn't quite work out the taxonomy. We had a mention of the Library of Congress coming up with 32 different sectors that David Ernst was using for liquid democracy in the States. And it seems to me that on one hand, if it was a free-for-all issue, I think I heard you say earlier, then that doesn't allow for effective agglomeration, for want of a better word. But equally, if you allow someone to present a rigid taxonomy, there's actually some power in defining that taxonomy in the first place. What was the resolution for that? And again, forgive me if I missed that while I was attending to my dog.
Yeah, so my thinking is it is kind of a controlled folksonomy. So a thing that, I don't know if that exists, but it's somewhere in the middle between a controlled taxonomy that prescribes everything in advance and a folksonomy where everybody can create his or her own tag in addition to. So somewhere in the middle, meaning, the structure will evolve, in coordination with everybody else here. So if somebody introduces a new tag, say finance, then there needs to be a reason why we want to introduce a tag. And this is more important for tags that are sort of higher up in the hierarchy, which is another important discussion here, is how much of a hierarchical structure do we embed in these tags, right? So do we say marketing is higher up than, say, could even say finance, right? Is that part of it? Or do we leave that open and do not define that hierarchical structure early on, or maybe I'm still thinking at all, is that a needed thing? Because if
both and
maybe it's both and, you're right, Mike. Right.
Yeah, I think there, that we have to have a hierarchy. That there has to be, that we have to allow a local language to emerge and perhaps percolate up the hierarchy, because we can't enforce a common language or taxonomy, and
well, it's a live system or a dead skeleton.
Yeah, doing so allows it to evolve, and it doesn't mean it's unplanned or unorganized, but yeah, at the bottom in this team, we should be able to establish any label for any purpose. Okay, and that has meaning in this context. Whether it goes to a greater context, to the collective, is something the collective decides.
Yes, that's the whole crux of it, is the right context. Because I do want to have this system, for, let's say, a project team, like the ecosystem mapping for Christina. This is the context for her, so she can tag that on these cards, and she sees who is a member of her team, and also voting on then the issues that she might have, in her project. So that applies for her context, but then as well as, is she embedded in some other, higher level structure, of the collective? And let's get to that embedding mechanism and this the holocratic structure that I also see as part of the social ledger. And let's move on to the next slide here, which is the notion of can this system be corrupted or not, right? So how fast can you get off rails here? And for that, I read about a few papers out there on liquid democracy that try to introduce mechanisms to get around that problem. One of them is the notion of a trustee. So a trustee is a person that's kind of above a delegate. And I'm calling delegate proxies here now. I think that's what David is also using in his thing. So proxies are people you can delegate your vote to, but they have a certain limit, to how many votes do they actually get. If they go beyond that limit, and in this is just exemplary here. If that goes, say, beyond 99, then you can no longer be a proxy. You are then going into a new role, which is called a trustee. Say that goes starting from 100 votes up to 1,000 votes, let's say. So this is still within, you see these 3 columns here. So the started line indicates a domain here. Say this is marketing here, and we have people in marketing. And we have 4 proxies in marketing, all have below 100 votes. But as soon as it gets above that, then there's another role, like a trustee, that has even more voting power than these proxies here. And in order to get into that role, there may be another process or step, or just, it takes time to be ready for that role. Sort of time will tell if you're the right candidate for that. Because remember, this is all liquid here. Meaning if people don't like what you do here as a proxy, even, right, they take away your vote. And then you suddenly either fall back to you have a single vote, or you can't get up to the next level, which would be trustees. But one thing I wanted to talk about here is the notion of corruption. How do you corrupt the system? Because you can imagine there's a subgroup of people here. There are 10 people joining the collective, and they all gather together with the idea of, we want to corrupt this system. We want to vote our own delegate into this system, right? So he or she will always go against whatever else is doing, whoever else is doing something in the collective, right? So potential for that is there, right? So you can sort of skew it to say, this person is controlled by, a group of people here, who then votes, even, tries to get into a higher level here. Which to me, is now something, goes back to the question of visibility of, do we know who voted for what? Can we recognize that there are certain groups that are forming in the system that are trying to skew it, right? They're trying to corrupt it, right? That's still an open question to me, but this layering here will, I think, make it, say, more stable. I mentioned here these words here on the right side, meaning on the lowest level as an individual, if you only have 1 vote, if you don't delegate, it's very variable, meaning it can go both ways. It's sort of, unstable. It depends on, what it is, situation is, what the mood is of the person, whatever, right? Versus if you go level up, it becomes more stable, right? Because people start relying on proxies that are more consistent, right? More coherent. And they'll vote, you get to know what are they voting, what are they standing for. So this is a little bit more stable. And then you can even go higher with a trustee is, okay, that becomes a trustworthy person. He or she does a great job. Maybe it's a role that's permanent, right? That gets funded in the collective. Or at least, has some expectations that he or she will write about it, is knowledgeable about the domain, and has earned that kind of voting power, right? So even more trustworthy within the domain. And then we had a recent discussion here, Philip, that might be interesting for you. Is there anything above that? Well, yes, you can go higher. You can go actually cross domains. And if you want to, you can go across collectives, and you can go up and up and up. You can go to, a district level. You can go to a city level. You can go to a society level, right? There's no end to that, where you have these people getting into these higher and higher roles, including more and more people in whatever decisions you're making, right? So from the bottom, from a low level, at the edge, decision in your project team, towards the department, towards the collective, towards multiple collectives who are making decisions together, right? Towards whole, countries, making decisions. So this is a very flexible way of bringing people in and out of the voting process. Something really to consider here.
I love it. I have to say, I'm trying to think of how to challenge the trustworthiness or the trustedness, and I'm trying to think what that might mean for the proxy putting their vote behind a trustee, or an individual putting their vote behind a trustee, because I guess they can skip the levels, right? Anyone can vote delegate to one. Is it, by trustworthiness, are we saying that we feel like we know how they will act, or we feel we know on what basis they will work out how to act? There's probably other ones in there as well. I guess we don't have to define it, is it? It's just it's whatever the delegate, not the delegate. What's the name for someone who provides puts their vote to a delegate? Delegatee, delegator. That's it. That's the word I got there in the end. I guess we don't have to second guess the delegator's reasoning for delegating a vote, do we? We just allow them.
Right.
To do. Yes.
Yeah,
so I'm just thinking out loud. I'm just trying to get situate this in my mind.
Yeah, and it could also be, Philip, that this system becomes more transparent the higher you go up. So as a trustee, this is almost like a public role here, right? So everything you do is happening more in an open, transparent domain, which you need to share that. Otherwise, you don't get into that role, right? If it's still hidden and you don't clarify what your position is, then you're not becoming a trustee. Then you're staying as a proxy, right? And proxy could be sort of an in-between thingy, right? There's this golden rule that of liquid democracy, which says, if I give you my vote, I can see what you do with it. So as a minimum, huh?
See you later, delegator.
So if A delegates to B, and in turn B delegates to C, A can see how both B and C voted.
Yes.
Transparency. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Just so up your particular.
Up your particular. Right.
Up your particular. Yes.
That is being recorded.
Yeah. And it's also, and that's interesting, Google did this whole experiment with Google Vote. And one of the rules they embedded was you can cross domains with this. I don't see that as a valid thing. Cross domain meaning if I delegate to this person here, right? And this person now delegates to this person over here, or this person over here, right? In a completely different domain. So I would take over your vote too for this other domain, right? Even if I don't want it, but since this person is high up and then has that connection, it would cross over into that domain. I don't think that's a good idea. To me, what I see here is you stay in this domain, and that's where you expect the delegates to operate in. Anything that it's happening, let's say, in marketing, and I'll be informed about that because of this golden rule that I know exactly what's happening here and what's happening up here.
Domains, you could be an expert in marketing in the UK. You can imagine a domain being marketing and a domain being UK. Yeah,
sure. You can break it down as a geographic, functional area.
So their domains could be quite overlapping as well, as opposed to the three distinct columns you've here, as if each domain is separate from another.
That's a good point, Philip. And there's really, to me, there needs to be a lot of overlap. And it starts even with people voting over here. This blue circle could be the same person as this blue circle here, because of course you operate in multiple domains. Right.
Okay.
Ideally, you are affiliated with as many domains as you're knowledgeable about, or you willing to contribute and do something. So there's a huge overlap here in the different domains.
Multiple essences, I would say. Would you say multiple essences there, Phil?
Yes, I know. So my team members definitely talk in that way. Yes, over at Akasha.
Okay, so that's the idea of the different levels here. And Jim, to your earlier point about the trust metric, right? So what our chain did, we're using a specific trust metric that's based on 3 roles that people can be voted into. And this is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, there's a certification process through a peer review, right? So you have to say if you're a master, a junior, or apprentice, or you start here and then you show that you're doing good work, and then you become a junior and eventually you become a master of that. And then as someone in that role, you have particular voting power. Did I say that right? with the trust ratings?
You're correct. Okay, and as it's currently implemented, it's semi-centralized in that there's seed members that pass, in essence, pass trust down to the rest of the community. Ideally, you would want to have your trust, your ratings applied to with you as the seed member. Okay, how you trust everyone else individually would be better, so that it's decentralized. In other words, your trust and my trust together in a organization, controls the power that we give to others in our association.
Right. What's interesting to me in this model is this is really sort of a bottom-up thing, where there's a movement. You're not becoming a delegate right away. You're becoming it because a few people, you've done a couple of good votes, and people starting to trust you. So there's an upward movement here that takes time, right? So if 900, 100 votes, take time to build up, and then similarly here to become a trustee, that takes even more time, right? So there's a movement slowly going up, and it's not that anybody from, say, the top says, "Hey, you are this person," right? Or you are now a trustee. This is not happening in this model. This is really going the opposite direction, where any movement, occurs from the bottom upwards here. So that's an interesting aspect. And again, coming back to the bad actors, right? If we find out there's a bad actor in the system, there's another mechanism that says, okay, we can actually go to individuals and say, hey, let's vote this person into a different role, or out of this governance domain because he messed up, or entirely out of the system because he's a bad actor, right? So this is again emerging here. There's no point person in here. There's no centralized mechanism that says this is how we do it, and somebody funnels it through that mechanism. It's all wherever you are, you start voting and you start acting in the system, and the structure emerges out of this.
Yeah. Now the difference, I think, in what we're doing in our chain is we're doing it exactly as you are, from the bottom up. Mm-hmm. Okay, from the top down, I'm suggesting that it be done according to defaults, so that you may be assigned randomly a delegate, and there's some literature behind random assignment of representatives that supports that. According to trust, so that the people that have gained trust are more likely to be the default delegates of members when they come in, before they know anyone, and can choose their own delegates. They're already aligned with the overall organization,
right? In
terms of what the organization trusts.
Mm-hmm. Good. Yeah. So there's some good principles in place there. What do you do there, Jim?
Is that just a quick question about communication? I can see the votes being aggregated as you go up through this slide. I guess reciprocally, there's communication which ways, but in this instance, I'm thinking about filtering down, because, for example, a trustee has a responsibility to him or herself, let alone everyone who's delegated their votes to him or her, to communicate their reasons for voting one way or another. Mm-hmm. So the idea of liquid democracy is that perhaps you'll get people who are more knowledgeable using your vote in a manner that you expect would do you proud. But of course, in complex issues, which I think of as the raison d'etre for liquid democracy, it still is beholden to people who have aggregated lots of votes on a particular domain to explain the complexity so that people understand why they voted one way and so that they can perhaps retain their votes going forward. Does it encourage? This is such a woolly area and my vocabulary is so poor, but does it encourage the right actions? Or are there papers that describe liquid democracy as just encouraging the wrong sort of action, which is I just want to gather as many votes in that populist way that I possibly can and do anything I can to keep them? See what I mean? I guess I probably need to do a lot more reading on liquid democracy to understand where it has been used and what's been learned in those instances from real human behavior as opposed to normative expectations.
Right. Here, take a look at some of the links here on this slide at the bottom from the Google Vote experiment. I think they help think through this a lot because they had dealt with that same question of, how do these people that gather a lot of votes, are they allowed to promote themselves? Are they allowed to sort of put additional money into the system to gain even more votes or voting power?
Yes and no. Yes and no. There are times when you want that. Skin in the game, voting here. Are you real about it? I mean, this is a fascinating element of design and anticipation here. And I keep coming back to the analogy between getting in the air and landing. This is all landing gear in a sense.
Oh.
And it's landing gear for Mars, but maybe not so good for the moon and wouldn't work on Jupiter, etc. So we got, those are, I want to get in the air, right? What I want to see is the SL2 in very simple, clear-cut, practical, so we can explore this sort of thing.
Yeah.
Just do it.
Yep.
Right. And man, the landing on this shit is going to be immensely complicated. So let's get in the air first. That's easy.
Okay.
Then all you got to do is not.
A little bit more about landing later.
Well, remember Douglas Adams, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The important thing about learning to fly is don't think about the ground.
That's right.
At the same time, of course, software engineers are being encouraged to think of the consequences of their actions.
Yes, that would be good.
But we're not going to put this into some kind of national arena just yet. So we can have our test beds, right?
Well, there was a very interesting test bed I was on this morning with Laura was on it too. A guy called Rufus Pollock, Cambridge dude, economist. OpenRevolution.net.
Foundation.
Yeah, Open Revolution is his book. Fascinating stuff. He spoke extremely well. And what he's talking about is distribution rights, like how much is something worth and who's using it. And I'm seeing the same sort of elements as liquid democracy embedded in that. There's a flow-throughs from originators to different layers of users, and there's flow-backs. So we're always looking at this business of transferring attribution of value across layers, attribution of intention. Cybernetics, steering, like this is, you're playing with the 1 to 2 here, which is also the 2 to 3 and the 3 to 4. It's always the same transition. The meta management process is always going to
It's interesting because just reading that introduction to that book there, I would immediately be put off because it appears to be applying oh, let's have a free market and property rights and all this sort of stuff, which just seems to be very dull and actually counter to the subtitle of the book. Yes, well, actually, the sub-subtitle at the bottom there. But to be honest, Michael, if you like it, then I'm obviously shouldn't go on this description. I should just buy the book and read it.
Well, you don't even have to buy it. You can download it straight in EPUB or whatever, and it's very, very good. It's a little flat earth. Because like all good Cambridge economists, he doesn't know what money is. But apart from that,
Good.
Yeah.
Go get it.
And so there's a great intersection of all these species coming together at this point, and they're all talking the same stuff.
Yes, now we need some more coherence in this. We're talking about building the same stuff, not talking about it. Let me wrap this up here with one last slide here. I mentioned second order cybernetics earlier, right? So this is here's the Wikipedia thing, right? So input output, and then you have some feedback mechanism in the first order cybernetic cycle here, right? But then the second order guys, they think about themselves, put the system through its own iteration and see what comes out of the end. It's like applying cybernetics to itself. That's kind of the definition of the second order cybernetics. And there's this guy called Paul Pangaro who wrote a lot about this and has some great visuals on how to explain what this is. But coming back to social ledger and liquid democracy, how this could be applied here. So see it as first order is decision making. So this is whatever you want to vote on, whatever issue, whatever bill, whatever protocol, whatever proposal you have, you vote on that, and you help these 1, 2, 3 projects to move along, or some decisions you have to make in a certain domain here, right? So that's the first order. But there's this dotted line around that, sort of the wider circle that tries to bring some direction, some notion of a vision to every activity that's happening within that dotted circle, right? So, and for this, you can imply there's something like a second order, and I call it mission alignment, which is a meta vote on an issue. And this is a bit difficult to get because, you're not voting on the issue itself. You're not looking into the issue and say, okay, yes, we should move forward with that. You're looking at it from an outside perspective and say, is this vote, is that stuff that's happening in here aligned with what we want to do in, let's say, the collective, right? Is it aligned with, say, the mission of the collective, right? So you're voting on that. You're not particularly caring about whether it's a yes or no thing inside or a good and bad thing inside the actual issue. You're more looking at the issue from the outside and say, yeah, this is really aligned. If we solve this, right, however you guys wanted to do that in your project, right, let's say ecosystemic mapping there, if you guys resolve that and it works the way you advertise it, fantastic. That really gets us moving, into the whole idea of why we created this collective in the first place, and also sort of allow other groups now to follow that example and come up with other projects in that similar area, right? Gives a good example. So that's the idea of a meta vote, right? And then here's where it gets interesting. So if you assume you can do a meta vote on issues, then sort of the degree of alignment can denote something, right? It can say, okay, you're highly aligned, so a quorum, say, doesn't have to apply as strictly to this project as it does in another one. So that means if I see, a few people just voting and moving forward quickly, right, that's fine, because I know this is highly aligned, we can do that. If, however, on the other hand, I see this is completely misaligned, right, say project 1 here is a disaster, has nothing to do with the collective, should be somewhere out there. You can denote something more strict than even a quorum. Not only can you say, well, then I want 100% participation, right? So whoever is in that circle here, in that project, in that team, needs to be on the vote and clearly state that he or she is for or against it. Or you can even go further and say, well, that needs to be suspended. It has nothing to do with what we do in the collective, or eliminate it, right? So suspending meaning, let's put that on hold for a while and let's have more conversation about it. This might not be something you want to do and support in the collective. You can do it outside, of course, start up your own thing. That's fine, but not within the guidelines of the collective. And this is, to me, an interesting mechanism because it is the same sort of voting mechanism that you already do within the circle, but just on a higher level, on a meta level. And I'll stop here in a second. I just wanted to point out what the mechanics are. So the mechanics are, you would be in a certain group, say mission. So mission, you would be, if I go back to this one here, so let's say Anton here now has this mission tag, okay? So that tag is kind of special because that means it's a meta vote. Whatever happens, is visual, is happening here in this vote here. Under the mission tag, it would be a meta vote. So if you click on up or down, that means you're talking about the whole notion of, does it align with the collective or not, right? That's a different vote than looking at the issue itself that the people are talking about there. So that distinction is important. And I don't think it's easy to grasp for people because they would jump back and forth between this is meta, this is not meta here. And that's why I think this tag here is kind of specialist. So you need to be, again, in a certain role where we can trust you to become, a voter for these meta votes, right? So it could be higher up proxy here, or a trustee, or a super trustee. I don't know where that's anchored. But in order to do that, you would have to have a good understanding of, what does it mean to have projects running inside the entire collective, right? And what does it mean to align with the activities inside the collective, right? So I just wanted to add this to the mix of ideas here on liquid democracy, to have this notion of a second order cybernetic feedback loop be part of that.
Wow. The second order cybernetic loop got me going. I followed the Wikipedia link and that got me started, and came across this Mead, Bateson and Brand conversation, which reflects very, very strongly on all of this stuff. There's some delicious pieces in that. Particularly data and action. There's a section which I can probably find in there if I go looking at, where he's saying, okay, we need to be playing an interaction with this data to get any handle on it, any grasp on it. And I think that's my response to this whole presentation, Joachim, is you're gone beyond the stratosphere in so many of these components at this point. Very exciting. Now, I think we need something that we can get our teeth into, our hands on, our heads around, which embodies these elements, a skeletal system of this package, so that we can decide who's doing the coffee today or some crap like that. Very simple delegation.
Yeah, we're building an environment where we can build such things, and you want that environment. And
I want it all.
I think this is perfect to engage with ArtChain in guiding them in creating their liquid democracy.
Well, not just ArtChain, but basically this is a general device.
Absolutely. HoloChain has money too.
Right. That's it. Yep. We a simple case. I always go from let's start with good use case for the social ledger that we're building, and I think liquid democracy is a good one. And as you said, Michael, we don't have to overload it with functionality, but just keep it simple to just give people a way to say, hey, okay, here's something we want to vote on. And it doesn't even matter what tools you're using, right? So since the social ledger is, is independent of whatever, backend system we're using, that could be tied to a Lumio thing, could be tied to a Google document someone wrote, could be tied to some other piece where the conversation is happening, right? Where the arguments are exchanged back and forth, right? But the aggregate level to say, hey, here are all these 4 different ways to use this and make decisions. It's all on one screen, right? You can see that happening. And you can see, and going back to the affordances, you can see at a glance, what do I need to do here, right? So I can go say, if I'm a marketing domain, affiliate, I go to my marketing screen, I see the 4 issues that are open up for vote, I see the people that are in marketing, right, that I can delegate my vote to, and I can just click, 4 times here, and I'm done with it for the next year, and then come back later. Or I can become an active participant here and regularly check the open issues, right, and then see, okay, today I need to, take some action on this issue, and go then into the system that where the conversation is happening, right? I can go deeper and deeper and deeper if I want to, but I can always come back to my starting point, my entry portal, where all the activities are happening.
So, how would this fit with Farmville? Remember Farmville? You don't remember Farmville? Who remembers Farmville? Hands up.
The guys who are raising cows and tilling fields.
Virtual cows, virtual pigs, a virtual farm, and you could have a virtual co-op running this virtual farm, and they could be using all this shit. You see? Because this is what it is. It's about how do you bring direction and perception together. What do people want? What do they see? And it's going to be a learning curve.
Right.
And Farmville had millions of participants, just millions of them, spending hours every week clicking on feeding the chickens. So by comparison, participating in a liquid democratic process is rather more relevant. You can take yourself seriously, perhaps, I never played Farmville. I didn't do Farmville.
It's like you get to call a friend to answer problems.
One of the fascinating things about second-order cybernetics, of course, is the quality of the feedback loop. If you have less than good information, then the system can go in one direction, and if you have better quality information, brackets define, close brackets, then the system can go in more of a right, brackets define, close brackets, direction. And I then can't help but see that as almost the question of how humans and digital actually come together, how conversation plays out between people and how messages play out between digital devices, between software. And you mentioned...
you really ought to check this Oikos, Mead and Bateson, talking about exactly this thing, the quality, the nature of the feedback loops and the meta levels.
Cool.
And how it... And they were talking about how television is dumbing people down too, and this is in the 70s. So
well, that was about the time.
It's all about the forms of feedback.
Yeah.
Positive feedback, negative feedback, layers and whatever. Yeah, love it. Sorry.
No, it's perfect. I mean, in fact, you mentioned Paul Pangaro, Joachim, who actually was the chap who introduced me to Adrian Gropper back in the day.
Wow.
I sometimes forget that. I've been had a good call with Paul and the Akasha team this week, where we were trying to understand this. So, as well as cybernetics, of course, very closely related to that is conversational theory. Gordon Pask's work, which now that Pask is no longer with us. It seems that Pangaro is amongst the global experts in that sort of thing. So we're trying to see if we can get some Pask to go alongside some Shannon and see if we can engineer something that might allow for collective intelligence, or at least knowledge formation, to crystallize more easily than otherwise. And it seems to me that the work that he's doing over at Carnegie Mellon the HCI research lab there, and the work that Akash is doing, and the work that Archain's doing, and Holochain's doing, and Social Ledger. This is just all highly complementary. Yes, to the point where we've been coming at it from slightly different but beautifully complementary angles. I'm just trying to work out how to see how we can collaborate and just get this going sooner rather than later. This is very exciting stuff. If the user experience, of course, and that quality of feedback loop through good quality conversation and accessible content that's honed from my level of literacy. If we can try and not boil the ocean, but if we can try and understand with a maturity where we're still falling way short and modify our vision just to take that into account while we're waiting for other innovations to happen around us, then this could be a very intriguing set of innovations.
I think that, having a social ledger that you control is the key element here that connects all of our activities and gives us the data. And it's the data has the value, and we can create all kinds of different things with it. It opens up a whole world of capabilities that we can try and just treat everything as an experiment.
Well said. Well said. Gentlemen, we're coming up to the end of this conversation here. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'll stop the recording. See you around next time. Thank you for watching.